For decades, fans have wondered what Sammy Hagar really thought about his legendary bandmate Eddie Van Halen. Now, after years of silence, Hagar finally speaks out, revealing untold stories, raw emotions, and shocking truths about their friendship, the highs and lows of Van Halen's life, and what it was really like behind the scenes. From personal struggles to unforgettable moments on stage, this is the candid, no-holds-barred insight fans have been waiting for. Raw, emotional, and unforgettable. When Sammy Hagar joined Van Halen in 1985, it felt like a new chapter in rock history was about to begin. The band had just lost their original frontman, David Lee Roth, and fans were nervous, wondering if Van Halen could survive such a big change. Hagar, already a successful solo artist and former lead singer of Montrose, brought with him a confidence and energy that immediately caught people's attention. He had a voice that could soar over Eddie Van Halen's blistering guitar riffs and a stage presence that made him impossible to ignore. Right from the start, it was clear that Hagar wasn't just a replacement. He was a force that would push the band to new heights. The first album with Hagar, 5150, dropped in 1986, and it was a game-changer. The sound of Van Halen shifted, embracing a more polished, radio-friendly style without losing the raw rock energy that fans loved. Songs like Why Can't This Be Love and Dreams showcased Hagar's powerful vocals and songwriting, blending perfectly with Eddie's innovative guitar work. Critics praised the album, and fans quickly embraced the new lineup, helping the band attract a whole new generation of listeners. Suddenly, Van Halen wasn't just surviving, they were thriving, topping charts and filling arenas with eager fans. Hagar's arrival didn't just revitalize the music, it revitalized the chemistry on stage. Eddie and Sammy's collaboration was electric, each feeding off the other's energy. Their shows were high-octane spectacles, a combination of technical mastery and pure rock enthusiasm. The band's following albums, OU812 and For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, continued the streak of success, proving that Hagar was more than capable of stepping into Roth's massive shoes. Behind the scenes, everyone could see that this partnership was special. Hagar brought a professionalism and work ethic that complemented Eddie's genius, and for a while, it seemed like nothing could break the momentum. The fans noticed it too. The live performances, the hits on the radio, and the undeniable synergy between Hagar and Eddie all pointed to a band hitting its creative peak. The rise of this rock-power duo wasn't just about music. It was about timing, talent, and chemistry coming together to create one of the most successful eras in Van Halen's history. It was a time of excitement, triumph, and the kind of musical magic that makes rock history. The world was watching, and for a moment, it seemed like nothing could stop Van Halen with Sammy Hagar at the forefront. Their rise wasn't just a comeback, it was a rebirth, a fusion of talent and energy that made the band feel unstoppable. The stage was theirs, the hits were flowing, and the fans were hooked, ready to ride this wave of rock perfection wherever it went next. When Sammy Hagar joined Van Halen, everything on the surface seemed perfect. The band was riding high, their albums were topping the charts, and fans were thrilled with the new sound. But behind the scenes, the story was far more complicated. At first, Hagar and Eddie Van Halen seemed like a perfect match. Hagar's powerful voice blended seamlessly with Eddie's guitar brilliance, and together they created some of the most iconic rock music of the 1980s. The chemistry was undeniable on stage, where they fed off each other's energy and delivered performances that electrified audiences. But off stage, things were not so harmonious. From the beginning, Hagar noticed that Eddie's perfectionism and intensity could be challenging. Eddie was a genius guitarist, no doubt, but his focus on his own vision sometimes left little room for collaboration. He could be unpredictable in the studio, changing arrangements on a whim or dismissing ideas that didn't align with what he had in mind. Hagar, who prided himself on professionalism and teamwork, found it increasingly difficult to navigate Eddie's moods. At first, he brushed it off as part of Eddie's brilliance, the quirks of a genius. But over time, it became clear that these quirks were taking a toll on the group's dynamic. As the band's success grew, so did the pressure. Touring was grueling, and the constant need to produce hits amplified the stress. Eddie's struggles with alcohol and later with other personal issues began to affect his behavior. Hagar noticed how Eddie's temper could flare unexpectedly, turning routine rehearsals into tense standoffs. Arguments would erupt over creative decisions, and what started as minor disagreements often escalated into full-blown conflicts. Hagar tried to keep the energy positive, pushing for collaboration and constructive communication, but Eddie's volatility made it increasingly difficult. Even small comments or suggestions from Hagar could trigger frustration, leaving him feeling sidelined and powerless despite his important role in the band. The recording of subsequent albums like untold and For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge highlighted these tensions even more. Hagar, dedicated to the music and the fans, wanted to push the band forward, maintain consistency, and uphold a professional environment. Eddie, on the other hand, was often consumed by personal struggles and obsessed with perfecting his guitar work. Their visions for the band began to diverge. Hagar wanted a team approach, while Eddie seemed intent on controlling every aspect of the music. This clash led to moments of frustration, where Hagar felt his contributions were being ignored or dismissed. It wasn't just creative differences, it was a growing personal divide that neither could bridge. Touring only intensified the situation. Backstage tensions became noticeable, even to those outside the inner circle. Crew members and supporting staff started picking up on the friction. Hagar would later recount in interviews that while they were performing flawlessly on stage, behind the scenes, it was like walking on eggshells. He never knew when Eddie might lash out, become withdrawn, or react negatively to a suggestion. The emotional roller coaster of working with a brilliant yet unpredictable bandmate left Hagar drained, constantly having to manage not only his own stress, but also the fragile moods of Eddie and the rest of the band. It wasn't all negative. There were still moments of brilliance and camaraderie, especially when a song clicked in the studio or a live performance brought the house down. In those moments, it felt like magic, and Hagar was reminded of why he joined Van Halen in the first place. But the highs were always accompanied by lows, and over time, the lows started to overshadow the highs. Creative disagreements turned personal, and professional collaboration began to feel like an uphill battle. Hagar's optimism and energy, which initially helped push the band to new heights, began to clash with Eddie's growing unpredictability, making every decision and interaction more fraught. By the early 1990s, the tension had become undeniable. Even fans could sense it, noticing subtle shifts in interviews, stage interactions, and behind-the-scenes stories. Hagar felt increasingly isolated within the band, struggling to have his voice heard in decisions that impacted the music and the group's direction. What had started as a partnership full of promise was now strained under the weight of personal differences, creative friction, and the relentless pressure of fame. The combination of Eddie's perfectionism, personal struggles, and temper created an environment where collaboration became exhausting, and every recording session or tour became a test of endurance. Looking back, Hagar reflected on these years with a mixture of pride and frustration. He knew the music they created together was extraordinary and that their collaboration had left an indelible mark on rock history. But he also recognized that the personal toll had been significant. The emotional strain, constant conflicts, and inability to fully reconcile their differences had slowly eroded what could have been a seamless, long-lasting partnership. Hagar's professionalism and commitment to the band kept him going for over a decade, but eventually, the friction reached a point where continuing under such conditions was no longer sustainable. The tensions beneath the surface were a hidden story, one that contrasted sharply with the public image of a rock powerhouse duo. While fans saw the hits, the tours, and the apparent camaraderie behind closed doors, it was a different picture. Hagar and Eddie's relationship was a blend of genius and frustration, brilliance and volatility. Their creative partnership produced iconic music, but it came at a cost, revealing how even the most successful collaborations can be vulnerable to human flaws and personal struggles. The cracks in their relationship were always there, gradually widening until the pressures of fame, personal differences, and unresolved conflicts made the eventual breakup inevitable. The story of Hagar and Eddie during these years is a reminder that rock history is not just about the music. It's about the people behind it, their triumphs, their flaws, and the delicate balance between creative brilliance and personal stability. The tension beneath the surface was the silent force shaping every note, every performance, and ultimately every decision that would lead to one of rock's most dramatic and talked about departures. The story of Sammy Hagar's time in Van Halen is often told through the music, the chart-topping albums, and the sold-out tours. But behind the scenes, it was a different story. A story of tension, frustration, and eventual heartbreak. For years, Hagar had poured his energy, creativity, and passion into the band. From the moment he joined in 1985, he brought new life to Van Halen, and together with Eddie, they created hits like Why Can't This Be Love, Dreams, and When It's Love. The combination of Hagar's powerhouse vocals and Eddie's legendary guitar work defined an era in rock music, giving fans a band that seemed unstoppable. But as successful as they were publicly, internally, the partnership was wearing thin. At first, Hagar had tried to adjust to Eddie's personality. He knew Eddie was a genius, but also understood that genius often comes with unpredictability. He admired Eddie's talent and wanted to work together to find harmony between his own vision for the band and Eddie's creative instincts. The early years were full of energy and collaboration, with the band producing albums that were both commercially successful and musically innovative. But over time, Hagar began to notice cracks in the relationship. Eddie's perfectionism became controlling, his moods unpredictable, and his focus on his own ideas often overshadowed the contributions of others. Hagar, who valued professionalism and teamwork, found this increasingly difficult to manage. Touring, which should have been a time to showcase their music and connect with fans, often became a test of patience. Eddie could become withdrawn or irritable without warning. Rehearsals that should have been productive would sometimes spiral into arguments over arrangements, lyrics, or the direction of a song. Even during recording sessions, Hagar would run into resistance, as Eddie dismissed or altered his suggestions in ways that left Hagar feeling marginalized. For someone who had invested so much of himself into the band, this was not just frustrating, it was exhausting. By the early 1990s, the tension had reached a critical point. Despite the success of albums like OU 812 and For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, the working environment had become toxic. Hagar felt increasingly shut out of the creative process. Decisions were being made unilaterally by Eddie, and Hagar's input, once valued and central to the band's direction, was now often ignored. Hagar, who had always been passionate about the music and committed to producing quality work, found it nearly impossible to reconcile this growing lack of collaboration with his own standards and expectations. The pressures weren't only creative, they were personal as well. Eddie's struggles with alcohol and other personal issues only amplified the volatility within the band. Hagar, ever the professional, tried to keep things positive, but he was human. He grew tired of walking on eggshells, of having to navigate Eddie's unpredictable moods, and of constantly compromising his own vision. The emotional toll of maintaining the band's momentum while also managing interpersonal conflicts became overwhelming. He began to realize that no matter how hard he tried, some things were beyond his control. The recording sessions for Balance in the early 1990s marked the final stage of this downward spiral. Hagar gave everything he had, pouring his heart into the music, but the friction with Eddie continued to mount. Arguments over creative direction became more frequent and more intense. The once fun, electrifying collaboration now felt like a minefield, with each rehearsal and each studio session threatening to explode into conflict. Hagar found himself constantly negotiating, mediating, and trying to maintain some semblance of unity, but it was a losing battle. By 1996, after years of navigating these challenges, Hagar reached his breaking point. The professional disagreements had evolved into personal ones. The joy he once felt creating music with Eddie had been replaced by frustration and exhaustion. He realized that staying in the band was no longer sustainable, not for his creativity, not for his peace of mind, and not for his health. Leaving Van Halen was not just a career decision, it was an act of self-preservation. Hagar had poured years of his life into the band, helping it achieve new heights of success. But the internal conflicts had become too much to bear. When Hagar finally announced his departure, it sent shockwaves through the rock world. Fans were stunned. The media speculated endlessly about the reasons behind his exit. Was it creative differences, personal conflict, or something deeper? Hagar was candid in later interviews, explaining that the decision had been years in the making. He spoke openly about the emotional strain, the frustrations with Eddie's unpredictability, and the impossibility of continuing under such conditions. Despite the public perception of the band as a cohesive, high-energy unit, the reality was far more complicated. Leaving Van Halen was bittersweet. Hagar loved the music they created together and valued the fans who supported them, but he also knew he couldn't continue in a situation where his contributions were being marginalized and his creativity stifled. His departure marked the end of an era not just for him, but for Van Halen as a whole. The dynamic that had made the band so electrifying on stage had disintegrated off stage, and the once powerful partnership between Hagar and Eddie would never be the same. After leaving, Hagar went on to have a successful solo career, but the shadow of his Van Halen years remained. The albums he made with Eddie were timeless, their anthems enduring across generations, yet the personal cost of that collaboration lingered. Hagar's exit serves as a reminder that even the most successful partnerships can unravel when personal differences, creative conflicts, and unaddressed tensions reach a tipping point. The breaking point had been reached, and for Sammy Hagar, leaving Van Halen was the only way to reclaim his own voice, his own peace, and his own path forward. The story of Hagar's departure is both a cautionary tale and a testament to resilience. It shows the complexity behind iconic music, revealing that behind every chart-topping hit and sold-out tour, human relationships and personal struggles can define the true story. Sammy Hagar left Van Halen not out of failure, but out of strength, a recognition that sometimes the greatest act of courage is knowing when to walk away from even the most dazzling stage. Looking back on Sammy Hagar's years with Van Halen is like opening a photo album filled with both brilliance and heartbreak. The story of their collaboration is one that rock fans still talk about with a mix of awe and what if. On the surface, Hagar and Eddie Van Halen were a powerhouse duo, two forces that seemed to channel pure energy into music that defined an era. Hagar's arrival in 1985 injected a fresh vigor into the band, giving Van Halen a new voice and a new sound that resonated with both longtime fans and a younger generation. Albums like 5150, OU 812, and For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge weren't just commercial successes, they were cultural moments. Songs like Why Can't This Be Love, Dreams, and When It's Love became anthems for a generation, soundtracks to summers, concerts, and lives. The chemistry between Hagar's powerful vocals and Eddie's unmatched guitar work created a magic that few bands have ever achieved. Yet behind the bright lights and roaring crowds, the reality was far more complicated. Hagar has openly reflected on those years, describing a mixture of exhilaration and exhaustion, triumph and frustration. While the music itself soared, the relationships within the band were fraying. Eddie's genius was undeniable, but his personality, his moods, perfectionism, and personal struggles created a pressure cooker environment. Hagar, ever professional and dedicated, tried to navigate these tensions, but even he reached a limit. There were moments when the creative energy that fueled their music clashed with the personal conflicts that simmered just below the surface. The albums were hits, but making them was often emotionally draining, with arguments over musical direction, lyrics, and decisions spilling over from the studio to the tour bus and backstage. Hagar's reflections paint a picture of a man caught between love for the music and the reality of working alongside someone whose brilliance was matched by volatility. He has spoken candidly about the emotional roller coaster of those years, how one day the band would feel unstoppable, and the next the creative spark would be overshadowed by tension. These highs and lows weren't just professional, they were deeply personal. Hagar invested his heart into Van Halen, and yet, time and again, he found himself negotiating his own vision against Eddie's, trying to keep the music alive while managing the strain of an unpredictable partnership. The conflict took a toll, not just on his creativity, but on his peace of mind. Looking back, Hagar even contemplates the what could have been moments. He wonders how the band might have evolved if the personal and creative tensions hadn't escalated to the point of no return. Could they have continued making music together for another decade? Could there have been a reconciliation that preserved their incredible chemistry? The truth is, no one will ever know. What is certain, however, is that the music they created during those years remains timeless. The hits from Hagar's era are still celebrated, covered, and played on radio stations and streaming platforms around the world. That legacy of music is a testament to their undeniable talent and the power of their collaboration, even if the personal relationship couldn't endure. Hagar's reflection also touches on his own growth and understanding. Leaving Van Halen was painful, but it allowed him to reclaim his creativity and pursue his own path. His solo career flourished, giving him freedom to explore music on his own terms, without compromise or constant negotiation. Yet he doesn't dismiss the significance of his Van Halen years. They were formative, intense, and defining, shaping both his musical style and his approach to collaboration. He acknowledges Eddie's genius, the joy of creating hits together, and the deep connection with fans who embraced their music. At the same time, he recognizes the inevitability of the breakup. The personal differences, unresolved conflicts, and the pressures of fame made the split almost unavoidable. In interviews, Hagar often balances nostalgia with honesty. He doesn't romanticize the past. He acknowledges the struggles and the tension, but he also celebrates the music they made. He speaks of the energy in the studio, the thrill of touring, and the moments when everything aligned and the band felt unstoppable. These memories are tinged with melancholy because alongside the joy is the recognition of what was lost, the creative partnership, the camaraderie, and the chance to see how far they could have gone together. Ultimately, Hagar's reflections serve as a reminder of the duality of legacy. There is the tangible legacy of music, albums, and hits that stand the test of time, and there is the intangible legacy of relationships, choices, and missed opportunities. Hagar's time with Van Halen is a mix of both. The music endures, inspiring new generations of fans and musicians, but the personal story is more complicated, a mix of triumph and heartbreak, success and tension, connection and conflict. The narrative of what could have been will always linger, a shadow over an otherwise brilliant era. Even now, years after leaving the band and following Eddie's passing in 2020, Hagar continues to honor that legacy while acknowledging its complexity. He speaks with respect about Eddie, gratitude for the music they created, and honesty about the struggles that led to his departure. The story of Van Halen with Hagar is, in many ways, a perfect reflection of rock history itself. Messy, intense, brilliant, and unforgettable. It's a legacy that continues to resonate, not just because of the music, but because of the human story behind it, the triumphs, the challenges, and the enduring question of what might have been if things had been different. In the end, Sammy Hagar's reflections remind us that even the greatest partnerships are fragile. Creative genius can clash with personal differences, and success doesn't always protect against human conflict. Yet, despite the heartbreak, the music remains, and the legacy lives on. Hagar's time in Van Halen is proof that magic can be created even amidst tension, and that sometimes the songs we leave behind are the truest measure of a collaboration's lasting impact. The story of Hagar and Eddie Van Halen is both a celebration and a cautionary tale, a reminder that the greatest triumphs often come with the deepest complexities.